Yeah, well, it's good to we can finish this off. That would be
Yeah,
great.
man. Yeah, where did we leave off last time?
Yeah, so we did Cannae. I think we
Mhm.
talked all about Cannae. Yeah, and I think we sort of covered that basically. So sort of the Roman
Yeah.
panic, and I think I was just going to start talking about Spain and stuff. But
Well,
I could pick it up from there.
did
Or
we cover the theories as to why Hannibal didn't march on Canada?
yeah, because you said it was a fallacy that you didn't have enough guys.
Yeah,
So
well,
Rome wasn't
it's
that
not that
big
it's a
and stuff.
fallacy; it's a falsehood.
Sorry,
But
well, quite
yeah,
sorry, quite right. Yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
I
wrong
think,
word.
I think he, I mean, 45,000 men after casualties is still a lot of men to have left.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think he definitely had the strength. I mean, like we were saying, Rome's walls were only 13.5 miles long, something like that in total. So it really wasn't that big a city at this point.
And you're quite right, actually. That was one point I want to say, that even in the age of Augustus, which is obviously a couple hundred years later,
Yeah,
there's the old saying that Augustus found a city of Rome and left it a city of marble.
city
So,
of brick.
sorry, quite right. Actually, you've got it right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so you're talking about a couple of hundred years later. So Rome at that point, during the age of Hannibal, was probably quite well. Yeah, as you say, nothing like the massive marbled metropolis that some people might think.
yeah. It's not Rome at the height of the empire. I mean, it's still probably the leading city of Italy at this point.
Mm.
But it's not some giant behemoth. And like for comparison, like 13 kilometers of walls is a lot, but it's it's not that big. I mean, they're Mesopotamian cities. Babylon had similar sizes, like more. In fact, there were Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. Xenophon said that they were something like 16 miles long. So they had that. Well, Rome was not actually that big as these things go, and yeah, I mean Hannibal could easily have invested it, but again, that's. I think for Hannibal, what it is like ceding the initiative, and
Yeah.
because if he's investing in a siege, then the Romans can operate around him, and he's pinned down. But
Yeah.
again, I think it was actually about Hannibal wanting Rome to bend the knee. But anyway, yeah. So,
And
what was?
one other thing I would just say about that is that a lot of people think that, and I've heard people say that Hannibal couldn't have sort of surrounded or starved Rome out because they've got Ostia, they've got access to the sea. But in fact, that wasn't the case. Ostia wasn't really used until much later in the age of like Claudius, something like that. So at that point, you still had to ferry things up the Tiber to get them into Rome.
Yeah, or bring them overland.
Of course, yeah. Might be good to actually take a step back and look at the whole strategic picture just at this point, because apparently Carthage sort of had the upper hand at sea, and there was some talk that they were going to move a big fleet or one of their fleets from Sicily and move it up to sort of blockade the mouth of the Tiber if Hannibal was going to go for a siege.
Yes.
There was talk that he could do that as well, but obviously that never happened. He didn't really go for that angle.
Yeah. Well, I assume it didn't happen because Hannibal didn't siege Rome.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, isn't it? Like the Carthaginians, something like a 90 ship war fleet is floating around somewhere along the west coast of Italy, making sure the Romans can't bring in reinforcements from Corsica or Sardinia or anywhere else. And you'd think that, Christ, man, you've won this war. You've just won it. And you could literally just march over there in absolute panic. Who knows what stupid decisions the Romans will make? And, you can blockade them. You can show their allies, send out scouts to all their allies and be like, look, we are currently sieging Rome. We've wiped out all of their armies, and if any come near, we're going to wipe them out too. What are you doing? The Romans are over. Just bring your men in. We're going to get our revenge. Everyone gets to, get their revenge at the Romans because you've all got grievances, and this is over. And then you can go back to being the sort of people that we exploit through trade. That's literally the goal for the Carthaginians here, and Hannibal sat right at it. So I can, what is it, Mago and Maharbol is like, you know how to gain a victory but not how to use one. I can totally feel the frustration they must have felt. I can totally feel it.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that this moment does go down in history as a high watermark for Hannibal, because, as I say, if you look at the whole strategic picture of the whole map, at this point there's revolts in Sicily and Sardinia and Corsica, and the Romans are doing particularly poorly in Spain. There's still a whole theatre of conflict in Spain. They're not doing well there. And Philip the Fifth of Macedon decides to, this is just after Cannae, this is the moment to sort of do something finally. Although it's kind of half-assed, but nonetheless.
I actually watched a documentary about this today in
really?
preparation for this. Yeah. So specifically about what was happening in Greece at the time, because Greece had very complex and actually quite formalized power politics by this sort of time. The balance of power has been established between the Macedonians, the Ptolemies, and the Seleucids, and there's been hundreds of years of fighting, but essentially it's kind of made them a feat. Like when the Romans come into contact with the Greeks in the East, they smash them quite fucking handily, actually, to be honest. But anyway, no, that aside, there's a lot of change going on. The balance of power gets upset, and after a weak period for Macedon, it's resurgent again under Philip V, who supposedly came to power as a child, but obviously under a regent, and ended up consolidating Greece under Macedonian power. After defeating a bunch of revolts and from the Aetolian League and various others, and Athens I think was one. And so the problem that the Romans were facing is that you've suddenly found yourself with what is a major world power that is actually trying to form an alliance with the guy who's currently in a position to besiege your capital. So I mean, things are really dire for the Romans at this point.
Yeah, really badly. I mean, just on that Philip V, he he fancies himself as a new Alexander, doesn't he? He goes around conquering in Turkey and Syria, like down to Rhodes and Pergamum and all places like this. And
does he go that far?
I think he does. Yeah.
Oh, that's later on, though. I think.
Yeah, I suppose. There's I think there's 3 Macedonian wars, aren't there? The first one's just a little bit of a holding pattern. The second one, they kick his ass but don't kill him or imprison him or anything, and then there's a third one where they do sort of do him in. But I think a lot of it, the Romans used a lot of politics because the main bulk of their martial forces were needed against the Carthaginians, so they would use a lot of politics and mercenary forces. I think there's a lot of Greeks fighting against this Philip for the Romans.
Well, this is the thing. Was it Flaminius? I think it was.
He's the main commander.
Who was sent over, but he relieved someone else who was absolutely terrible. And the reason they'd got involved in Greece anyway is because of Illyria, wasn't it? The kingdom of Epirus basically imploded after Pyrrhus's death, and the Illyrians extended down the seaport, and they found themselves essentially able to conduct vast amounts of piracy against Italy. At will, and this was a problem for the Romans, as you can imagine. And so Roman diplomacy being what it was, they would essentially like, you will stop this or we'll come and spank you. And the Roman involvement is essentially an extension of that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is how they end up getting drawn into Greek politics.
Yeah, it is often said that you can make the argument that Rome were sort of drawn eastwards, kind of against their will. It wasn't just insane aggression from them. They were sort of drawn into it.
For the first time ever, Rome didn't actually start it.
I think at one point, it might be the Second War, I think that they end up giving him really good terms for once. Like one of the only times you can find Rome giving someone else decent terms, it's just because they need to buy some time. And they end up smashing him in the end, of course. But I mean, even like I say, the whole circuit of the Mediterranean, things are going off. Even in the north, like even in the Po Valley, there's Gauls coming down, whilst Hannibal's in the south of Italy, and loads of other places in Sicily. After Cannae, they sort of can smell the winds. And I think Capua, the one I think at the time the second biggest city in Italy, other than Rome, they flip to Hannibal, and it's not that far south of Rome. And in the year or two to come, Hannibal takes the Tarentum, which is like it ends up being
the Greek city that invited Pyrrhus over.
Exactly. Yeah, same place, same people. Yeah. And it ends up being his base for quite a few years, doesn't it? He basically becomes the master of southern Italy for many a year going forward.
But the thing is, that's actually a problem for him. This is all.
It's not ideal, is it? Yes.
No. This is why he starts losing. Actually, it's kind of frustrating. But the thing is, you can see him getting sucked into this inevitable trap that he can't really get out of because his allies are fucking feckless. Like, what good is having Capua? Like Capua, that's a curse. I mean, after he winters his army there, Harold Lamb is like, well, his army never performs the same as well again. But he then goes on to defend and says, but Hannibal actually never calls upon his army to do the same things again because he's constantly shifting his tactics to meet the current demands. So that might be an unfair thing for historians to say. But Capua is famous for making soldiers soft because it was a city of total opulence. You know, they had this special kind of wine. I can't remember the name of it offhand. But they produced some sort of special kind of regional wine that was particularly good, and they obviously were just a den of iniquity with prostitutes and musicians and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, yeah, I bet it's wonderful to spend the winter in this lovely, warm, like, you know, den of iniquity. But at the end of the day, you know, you are trying to beat the Romans here, aren't you? You know, but I suppose the troops probably had earned it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think last time we talked about how Hannibal sent his brother back to Carthage for more reinforcements, and that great scene of him pouring out the bag full of patrician rings, signet rings. So yeah, he doesn't. I suppose if I could just talk about the Spanish theatre for a bit, if we sort of hop over to there, because one of the other things that is said a lot that it doesn't escape a historian's eye is that one of the interesting things Rome decides to do is, even whilst Hannibal is in Italy, they will gather whole new armies, consular armies, and send them to other places in the Mediterranean. And, you know, some people would say, well, if you can raise armies, why wouldn't you send them immediately against Hannibal? But it does seem like a good strategic decision because they can't really beat him in the field. He has got their number. And it is a great thing to do to whittle the Carthaginians down in general. I mean, ultimately, we know, don't we? Ultimately, it does work. But over in Spain, they send the two Scipio brothers, the Scipio the elder, the Cornelius Publius Scipio, and his brother Gnaeus, and they send them over there, and they actually have a success in 215. They have the Battle of Ibera against Hasdrubal himself, and the Scipii are successful there. None of the big players die in that one. It's counted as a Roman victory, but it's certainly not decisive. I think, as I said before, the Spanish theatre seems to be really quite deadly. The Romans seem to view it as the worst one. If you're going to be posted anywhere, a bit like the Germans in World War II, you don't want to get posted to the Eastern Front. That's going to be a meat grinder. I think the Romans look at Spain like that, don't you think?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've not read anything that leads me to think that. Nothing. Like, I mean, especially not judging by given what's going on in Italy. But, I mean, I'm not saying it's not. What are you drawing on there?
Maybe I'm talking about it a few years after this, because if we're sort of doing it chronologically, to jump ahead a little, both those Scipio brothers are killed, and lots of armies are lost.
That's true. But lots of armies are being lost everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah, certainly. I mean,
the Romans really are like, and the thing is, this is a great point actually, because this really is a testament to the sheer determination and just resolve to just go, no, we'll just raise another army. You know, have whoever we've got left, we will just throw all of our manpower at you, and that is literally how Rome wins most of its wars. I swear to God. Like all the ones that matter, you know, all the major wars that count, Rome wins by just being more determined.
That sort of just we'll never give it. We'll fight them in the hills, etc.
There's genuine kind of Churchillian spirit about it.
Well, in 212, the Romans retake Saguntum. You know, that you remember. Everyone, hopefully, the listeners remember the flashpoint city in Spain. I'd say it's probably about halfway down. Wouldn't you say, roughly?
Yeah, it's about halfway.
South of the Ebro, and they retake that. So that's quite a fairly significant thing. I mean, I sort of think that whoever controls Saguntum has kind of got the momentum with them. It's symbolic in some ways. But the very next year, 211, the Battle of Baetis. That's where Scipio dies. The main Scipio. Scipio Africanus' dad. He's killed in a battle there. The Carthaginians also decide they actually were going to send some reinforcements to Hannibal at this point, finally. And they're sort of ready to send them. But then they decide they're going to send them to Spain instead, which really helps. I mean, that does help the guys that are there, Mago, Gisgo, Hasdrubal. All those guys are in there. and they send the reinforcements in. It does seem to really help because, yeah, Scipio dies, and not long after, his brother Gnaeus is also surrounded down in southern Spain. The Romans are trying to push their luck. They, as I said, they sort of feel the momentum is with them after Saguntum, and they're pushing down into southern Spain. But yeah, both of them get themselves and their armies killed. Actually, Gnaeus's one is a bit poignant. He sort of ends up surrounded on a hillside. Is it the name of the place? Ilora, I think it is. And he has like a last final poetic stand on a hillside. It's almost maybe a bit perfect, you know.
Yeah. Probably slightly embellished, but yeah. But I mean, probably still quite a heroic stand. You know, that's what happens.
And back in Rome, Fabius is sort of the man who after Cannae, again, his strategy of just mirroring Hannibal's armies and not making sure he doesn't engage, again appears yet more prophetic, yet more perfect, the thing they really should have done. So he's sort of elevated a bit further, if anything, and he gets more consulships and that sort of thing. And Hannibal is sort of contained essentially within Italy. There's another guy I'd like to mention real quick called Marcellus. He has about 5 different consulships in this period, and he's not mentioned much. But well, I say he's not mentioned much. Plutarch's lives. We've got a life of Fabius, Maximus Fabius, and we've got a life of this Marcellus. One of the things, it seems, it's probably worth mentioning, I suppose, just as an aside a little bit, but he's a guy who, as a Roman commander in the field, fought a one-on-one with, I can't remember who it was. He fought a one-on-one with another king. Maybe it was one of the Gauls. I can't quite remember. And won. And there's only like 3 guys that have ever done that in Roman history. And one of us was supposed to be Romulus, so that's legendary anyway. It's probably not true. So it's one of 2 guys ever to do it. And it's, I mean, the highest possible thing you can achieve in Rome is a triumph. Other than the only other possible thing that families covet more is that particular honor of being in command of a whole army and then doing a one-on-one combat and winning. So I can feel like this Marcellus is worth just mentioning, at least in passing. So I read the whole of his life in Plutarch, so I feel like
I haven't actually read it because I didn't know who he was, so I was just like, well, I won't bother with that one.
It's not most people just read the Fabius one. It's so much more important and a bit more interesting. But also, one last thing I'll just say on that is that Plutarch did do, apparently, a life of Scipio Africanus, but it's lost.
Yeah, but it's lost. Yeah, I bet that would have been amazing.
How gutting!
Yeah, I know. Like totally gutting. Like, we should be thankful that we've got what we've got, but I mean, that one is really missing from the annals.
So I like a daydream is that one day in the news, it's some archivist somewhere has found in some old Cistercian monastery an old copy, a full copy of Plutarch. Like how good would that be? That's quite a history.
It would be amazing, but it's never going to happen.
Quite a history nerd's daydream, that one.
Yeah. But yeah, so things don't go well for the Scipii in Spain.
Yeah, so after the Scipii brothers, the elder Scipii brothers are defeated and killed, the sources say, Livy talks a lot about how back at Rome, nobody wants the command anymore. It's just a poison chalice. They feel like, if you take an army into the field, it's going to be a bad time for you. So no one really seems to want it. It's very rare in Rome that there aren't many guys, many families chomping at the bit for offices and honours. But at this point, apparently not many. It puts me in mind when Neville Chamberlain resigned and the people in the party, no one really wanted it. And Churchill sort of kind of half reluctantly stepped forward after Halifax sort of declined it. But anyway, this is where Scipio Africanus, he's not Africanus yet. He only gets, that's a title he gets after his achievements. But at this point, he's the son of the main Scipio, and Gnaeus was his uncle.
How old is he at this point?
He's still young. I think he's about 26 or something, maybe 27, something like that.
Yeah,
and he's too young really for command, isn't he?
Well, no, I think officially he was. I think there was actually, if I recall correctly, a rule of some sort that you had to be above a certain age before you got that kind of command. And the fact that he's being given it because no one else wants it and everyone else who did want it has been killed, kind of goes to show how much of a toll this war is taking on the Romans. I mean, and you can't understate this. It's like, this is such a difficult war for them to fight, and that it must have been genuine hell for the Romans to have to go through. It must have been, because I mean, at Carthage, nothing's happening. In Africa, everything's tranquil. You just look out the window and crickets. But in Rome, it's hundreds of thousands dead. In Italy, sorry, hundreds of thousands dead. In Spain, hundreds of thousands dead. Vast amounts of property destroyed. It's really bad.
Yeah, and of course, as we said at Cannae, the men folk of most of the aristocratic families died. So there is literally a dearth of talent.
Yeah,
quite literally. So I mean, Scipio steps forward, and as there's the thing that the census honorum, the sort of formal list of moving up. You go like creator and then a praetor, and up to a consul, hopefully at the top of the ladder. And there was really strict, at least at this time in Roman history, there were very strict property qualifications. You had to have a certain amount of money and age restrictions. And you had to be quite old, relatively old. I think you had to be like 35 or something before you could be a consul, that sort of thing. And anyway, Scipio the younger, he's sort of the main Scipio, really, out of all the many Scipios. He's too young. And it's one thing actually I'd like to mention that going forward in Roman history, there's a fair few examples of when someone is very young or too young, formally, technically, to hold certain offices and commands.
Like Pompey the Great.
Exactly what I was going to go on to. And people say that about Pompey a lot. And they say, it's completely unprecedented. Well, it isn't. Scipio Africanus sort of was the one that broke the mold, really.
Yeah. And in his defense, it was a time of dire emergency. So
yeah.
You can see why they allowed it.
And maybe a bit on this guy, he's sort of known as being sort of young and fashionable. He had long hair, which only the young people did. The older generation of Romans, sort of long hair, a bit like, I think like the 50s or early 60s. Everyone's got a buzz cut, and only a goddamn hippie, only a beatnik would have long hair.
Yeah. Scipio Africanus. I was going to use the word hippie. In fact, he a lot of them will have seen him as he wore his toga loose and stuff like this. He's like wearing this loose toga. He's wearing his hair long. Because the Romans incredibly conservative, traditional, patriarchal. The culture of Rome. You can't overstate just how strict the social mores were in this period of time. And so and not only was it strict, it's how they believe they drew their strength. They'll call back stories of people like Cincinnatus and who give up power. And then what was the general during the Samnite Wars who killed his own son for disobeying orders?
I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name, but it's a famous. And there are a few stories like this in Roman history, and they think it's because of their virtue in the fact of their traditions, so they hold to these with honestly a kind of weird amount of passion. But it's very unusual for someone like Scipio to be able to get the social capital to be able to get into the position that he's in. It just goes to show you how Rome is falling apart. That's what's happening.
Yeah, very much so. They're right on the cusp of imploding.
Totally.
Yeah, like for a while as well.
Sort
of teetering on the edge. Yeah. But when Scipio Africanus does get over to, so eventually, that was the thing we was getting to. No one wants any commands, and he steps forward. It's kind of brave, really, because he hasn't had any massive commands before. He's not green. He was wounded at Ticinus. He was wounded at Cannae. He was at Cannae. And he's 26. He's not 17. So he's not completely green, but he's nothing like a grizzled, experienced commander or anything like that. But he does step forward. I suppose his whole family name is on the line. His father and uncle have been killed, so it couldn't get much more personal.
His entire family, and again, people have got to remember that your family name and your lineage is very important in Roman society because it determines your place in Roman society. And so, the patrician class would have death masks of all the men in their lineage to show, with a list of their accomplishments and things like this. And so, growing up, you'll have seen the accomplishments of the ancestors of your family, and you would be expected to do as well, if not better.
That's so creepy, isn't it? Don't you think that death mask tradition is kind of creepy?
Well, I mean, I guess I didn't. I mean, it's there are a lot of things that are done in the past that are weird and creepy. And honestly, the death mask thing was the least of the creepy, weird things, in my opinion. Like, I mean, there are way worse things than that.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I feel like when Scipio does get in command, though, he's again one of these guys that's just good at it, kind of straight off the bat. It's not like he has to learn from a few humiliating defeats. He seems to sort of hit the ground running, I suppose, way of putting it.
Well, he was basically made by Hannibal, wasn't he, Scipio? Because how many battles
forged by him?
Yeah, forged by him. Yeah, because how many battles against Hannibal had Scipio been in?
Well, it's at least 2, but it could easily be more than that. I mean, he could easily be in. Well, when we talk about it, when you've only got a few hours to talk about it, you can only really skim over the biggest engagements. But the reality, of course, was that there were so many smaller ones that, and certainly lots that just aren't recorded by any of the original sources at all. But I think you're absolutely right. He was forged by Hannibal. His whole life. Well, sometimes in history, quite often actually, you get 2 families that are just pitted against each other to the bitter end. And the Barca family and the Scipio family are certainly one of those. In fact, I'll talk about a little bit later, more towards the end, that the parallels between Scipio and Hannibal's life. There are loads, so many. Obviously, Hannibal's a fair bit older, but nonetheless.
He's a generation before, but this is the point, though, isn't it? Like, Scipio hits the ground running because he is actually a veteran of the war, and he's been on the receiving end of Hannibal's brilliance. And at Cannae, and his most magnificent achievement, he watched it firsthand. He's lucky to be alive. Like, a lot of people didn't, make it, and so he knows what's to do. You can tell that he's been like, right, okay, and he does his own double envelopment when he's in Spain. He actually manages to do the same thing. It's not as grandiose as Hannibal's, but he manages to essentially copy the tactic because he's obviously been paying attention to how Hannibal works. Because Hannibal's great genius is the fact that he's interested in getting in the minds of his opponents, because everyone else is treating this like it's a question of whose troops are stronger and can push harder. But Hannibal doesn't approach it like that at all. He's completely lateral. He's not just, I'm going forward and I'm going to punch harder than the other guy. It's like, no, I'm just going to go around and punch the other guy in the back, and this guy won't see it coming. And Scipio gets it. Scipio has seen how devastatingly effective being smart is, and he's obviously quite a smart guy himself. Although he sounds, when you hear it, when you read about him, he sounds like a lunatic. Like, he sounds like he's an absolute fruitcake. But,
doesn't he refer to himself in the third person a lot, or have one-way conversations with gods?
Yes,
and things like that.
Yes. He's apparently often found wandering around and talking to himself, and when everyone asks, I'm talking to the gods, and he's a total loon, but he could win battles. So.
Yeah, so I mean, when he gets to Spain, I think there's 3 or even 4 Carthaginian armies or army groups are dotted around Spain, but there isn't one at their capital, Carthago Nova, and so Scipio makes a decision to try and attack that, which is quite bold, well, very bold, isn't it?
Very bold, yeah. Because that is a fortress. Like, this is Carthage's main base in Spain. Built by was it Hamilcar?
He founded it. I believe.
Yeah, and so it's a fortress. It's designed to withstand sieges because they know the anticipation being the Spaniards are going to rise up against the Carthaginians.
Yeah, and it's on the sea, and apparently it was very heavily fortified. But Scipio does, as you say, he's no longer one of these Roman generals who just smashes headfirst into something repeatedly and either loses or wins. He actually uses, as you say, like different psychological tools, or he's more into the game of intrigue and espionage and other things along those lines of playing all the angles he possibly can. Much more sophisticated. I thought actually of a thing, I don't know if you ever have a little cousin or a little niece or nephew, and you probably wouldn't notice it with your own kids if you see them every day, but you might have a little nephew and they're just a little toddler like sort of Gugar stuff, not really speaking in sentences. And then you don't see them for a month or 6 weeks. And suddenly they're sort of speaking in full sentences.
Yeah.
And it's surprising. You almost do a double take. I don't know if you ever had that, but I've had that a couple of times in my life.
Yeah, I have actually.
I feel like this is what the Roman army's like. It's sort of suddenly it's speaking in full sentences. Suddenly it's doing sophisticated stuff. Whereas before, literally just 5 years before or something, it was much as it had always been, just this sledgehammer. And it's good at being a sledgehammer for sure. But that's it, nothing more than that. And now, sort of suddenly, it's like a real human that's actually thinking for itself, and you can reason with it and all that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, but you can see like the development of Roman military tactics over the ages, where initially to beat their rivals in Latium, all that was required was to be the best phalanx and the most determinate phalanx, and then all that was required to beat the Greeks was just to be the most, the best, strongest forward-facing army and just push forward harder than them. And even then, again with Pyrrhus, it really wasn't that they were better; it's that they were more determined and he was more mercurial. He couldn't maintain the sort of the Pyrrhic losses that he would have to endure because of the Romans' toughness. But it wasn't through any great strategy or anything like that the Romans won their victories, because they didn't against him. But it worked against the other barbarians of Italy, But yeah, like you say, it's now that they actually seem to actually develop some kind of military science, and it seems to be Hannibal who taught them it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. A lot of people have said that Scipio just ends up out Hannibaling Hannibal. He's like directly learning, like directly taking Hannibal's skills and stealing them wholesale, and then maybe even tweaking them or adding to them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. I'm convinced of it.
At Carthago Nova, that he does sort of feints and sends a small sort of special forces kind of troop to do something sneaky. And it's not a case of just battering a wall down, and it's a bit more sophisticated. But he gets in there, and of course that's quite a coup, isn't it, to take Carthago Nova?
It's amazing. That's taking all their resources. That's making it. That's totally ruining Carthaginian stability in Iberia.
Yeah, because of course it says to any wavering tribes in Spain, maybe Carthage's hegemony is broken here. And if they've treated you like shit for the last few generations, perhaps now is the time to think about rebelling against them.
Yep.
And so
it is the terrible, terrible thing for the Carthaginians to have to endure in Spain.
So in only a few years, if we're talking about 208, 209, it was only a few years earlier, sort of 216, that it looked terrible for Rome, as we said. On all fronts, it was looking dire. And now, only 6 years later or so, they're clawing it back from the very precipice. They really are starting to claw it back.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is, what period of time are we going from Cannae to here?
Well, I was just about to talk about when Hasdrubal fights Scipio in 208. Right. But if there's something in between there you want to talk about.
No, that's good. That's good. We can go for it.
So in 208, Hasdrubal decides that at some point they decide that they're going to take their army out of Spain. I don't know if you want to say they're going to sort of siege Spain or surrender Spain, at least for a while. Hasdrubal's going to take... Yeah, he's going to take whatever army he can and recreate Hannibal's march across the Pyrenees, across southern France, across the Alps, down into the Po Valley, and hopefully relieve or at least meet up with his brother Hannibal. And so that's what he attempts to do. But on the way, he's sort of intercepted, or his way is blocked by Scipio, and they have an engagement. Again, it's not a decisive thing, but they have a battle.
Well, is this the Battle of Metaurus?
Yes.
Or is it? Yeah.
Oh no. Sorry, is it?
Or is that's later? I think. Actually.
Sorry, no. That's the next year. Sorry. Yeah, because Hasdrubal, although it's sort of chalked up as a Roman win, and it is, Hasdrubal and his army actually escape still.
Right. This is the one where the weather goes bad.
Oh, is that the one?
Yeah, that's the one.
Right.
and they have to Hasdrubal is able to withdraw. But the thing is, it was looking like Scipio was going to envelop him anyway. But the weather turns bad, and so Hasdrubal is able to effect a strategic withdrawal. Which, don't get me wrong, good discipline, good work. But you can see how Scipio is already getting the hang of Hannibalic tactics, and using them against them.
Yeah. He if he'd had a few more turns, so to speak, he would have definitely encircled him, and it would have been a complete massacre. Yeah, and it looks like people say, don't they, that Mago and Hasdrubal and the other Carthaginian commanders are good. They are certainly capable.
Competent,
It'd be unfair to call them sort of incapable, but then they're not geniuses. They're just nowhere near up to what Hannibal is capable of. And now it seems Scipio.
Well, that's the thing. In Scipio, Rome has found its military genius in the way that in Hannibal, Carthage had found it. Theirs. It's very, because I mean, like, no one else really stands out. Like the only other Roman general that really stands out is Fabius, but even then, he stands out for his strategic ideas and his strategic knowledge and tactics and strategy, rather than for his battlefield tactics. Fabius doesn't think that he can out tactic Hannibal, and so he doesn't. He's like, right, well, we can out strategy him, whereas Scipio is the only Roman commander who seems to be able and confident enough to actually beat Hannibal in the field.
Yeah, and this comes to exactly the bit where the Romans have to decide whether they're going to sort of stick with Fabius's style of sort of ultra defensive maneuvers, really, or whether they're going to have to sort of start striking out or not. In Plutarch says of Fabius, quote, "The Romans saw that he was dealing with Hannibal like an experienced wrestler and had mastered the technique of frustrating his opponent's moves, now that his grips and holds had lost their original force." But about talking about Scipio Africanus, that he was that his camp or his faction, if you like, or just the camp in Rome, that didn't feel necessarily that way. He said that quote, "The strategy of containing Hannibal in Italy was now out of date and had become an old man's task," end quote. So they're starting to realise that maybe it is time to sort of strike out. So when Hasdrubal comes down, he does recreate the march across the Alps, and he comes down into the Po Valley, into northern Italy, and there's a big battle there, and they sort of they do go out and meet him, and the Romans win that one, don't they?
Well, is this the Battle of Metaurus you're talking?
Yes.
Yeah. This is well, I say a shame because I don't know. I guess I'm rooting for the Carthaginians here, because I like rooting for the underdog. I know they're going to lose, so go on, we'll throw them with them. That'll be fun. But yeah, it is who's in charge of the Carthaginian side?
Oh, well, that is Hasdrubal.
It is Hasdrubal. Yeah. I thought it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and he dies.
Yeah, he does. Aren't all the brothers there though?
Not all in one place. No, so Hannibal is sort of stuck south of Rome.
Well, I know. Yeah, I mean, who are the other ones? Mago.
Mago's not there because Mago himself also. Well, we'll get to it in a minute, but yeah, he's not there.
Right.
I can't remember if Hasdrubal either actually dies in the battle or whether he gets wounded and dies a few weeks later.
No, I'm pretty sure he's killed in the battle.
Right.
Because the Romans take his head and then throw it over the walls of Hannibal's encampment.
That's right. Yeah, his brother, probably the person he's closest to in the world, probably. Yeah. And they do that. They throw severed head over the wall.
But I mean, I honestly, from what the Romans have had to go through at the hands of Hannibal, I can kind of see why they do it. I mean, look what you've done to us. So, I don't begrudge the Romans that kind of stuff, to be honest. I feel that's fairly warranted. To be honest, you deserve this, Hannibal. Come on.
Yeah, no, I mean, loads of people will have lost their family, including, as we've already said, Scipio himself, his own father and uncle. Yeah. And actually, this Scipio Africanus, has got a brother. There's a fourth Scipio, Lucius, and they actually sent him over to the eastern campaigns in Illyria and Macedonia and Greece. But there is another. He's got a brother, Lucius, that's also kind of important. Not as important as him, but there's yet another Scipio to take into account a little bit. But yeah, so Hasdrubal dies. So that must be a big blow for Hannibal, you would imagine, sort of psychologically or emotionally. Yeah. It's one of those episodes where it's just added in there as another thing, another event, but it's probably actually a biggie in his life.
Yeah, but because the Battle of Metaurus, before we move on, I mean, how big? It was huge, wasn't it? So 50,000 Carthaginian troops, something like that, and a similar number of Romans on the other side. and it's a clean sweep for Romans as well. I mean, like you say, like Hannibal's brothers were obviously competent, but they didn't have the direction that Hannibal had. You know, they could organize a battle, keep logistics flowing, you know, make sure everything was hunky dory. So against a regular opponent, they would have been perfectly formidable. They would have engaged in fairly routine warfare. It looks like, you know, sort of like routine maneuvers and things like this. But absolutely none of the grace that Hannibal brings to the battlefield is present within them, and it's a shame, you know.
Yeah, I mean, so the momentum keeps going with them. So in the next year, 206 now, we're talking. So, you know, like nearly 10 years, knocking 10 years, or it is 10 years since Cannae, and Hannibal's still sort of sitting down there.
So let's talk about what Hannibal's been doing for all this time, because this is as interesting as it is tedious. It's very interesting because it's very boring, and this is not Hannibal's strength.
Well, quite often, don't you think this bit is sort of montaged out of history a bit? Did you find that?
Yes. In fact, my memory of what happens is actually quite weak on this part, because it is. But the thing that I remember from it is the fact that it seems so uncharacteristic for Hannibal to fight like this, because essentially it's being dogged around Italy by Fabius as he captures cities and towns, peeling off allies only until he moves, and then the Romans just walk back in and go, "You're not going to do anything, are you?" And they're, "Oh, no, God, we're not going to do anything." And so now Hannibal has territory to protect and a goal to attain, and that doesn't work. You know, this is not going to be. He can't split his forces to manage this. He can't. He's not now strong enough to march on Rome, because marching on Rome, it had to be after that massive decisive victory. And he can't bring the Romans to have another giant battle, because, I mean, you know, how many times does that have to go wrong before they learn their lesson? And so this is actually, it's a really dull read, because it's just like factual here. You know, Hannibal takes Capua, Hannibal moves to Neapolis, you know, Hannibal moves to here, the Romans move to here, and it's just dull. I mean, minus skirmishes and stuff like that. I'm sure Hannibal suffers one small reverse as well, but it's not anything major. But yeah, the time is just really boring, and you can tell that this is not how Hannibal wants to actually fight the war either. You know, this isn't what gets his blood pumping.
Yeah, it's not what he was born to do, certainly. No. Yeah, and as the years tick by, or as the summers tick by, the Romans, well, it's one of those things, isn't it, where one side sort of quite slowly, quite subtly dwindles and ebbs away, and the other side just will only really increase in power and confidence. And so like the Roman armies that are containing him by, let's say, 205 or something, it's just a whole different ball game to what was going on during 217, 216, during the Cannae years. Around there, it's just a whole different thing. Rome have got their shit together. They've got their shit wired tight. You know, they're being really serious about everything, really conservative with the small c about everything. And
no more ridiculous heroics. You know, no more of this. We'll just march out there and just no, that doesn't work. You know?
Well, one of the things is, we come up to when Scipio comes back from being successful in Spain. The politics of it, or at what point, if ever, are we going to actually strike out? But I think just before we get to that bit, though, there is one other really big battle in Spain. I think you might disagree, or people that know this history might disagree with this, but I would say there's probably 5 massive, or 5 really, really big, important, famous battles. You got Trebia, Tresume, Cannae, of course, Zama at the end. But the other one is not Ilipa. You know, the Battle of Ilipa?
Let me just remind myself.
Because that's the one that a lot of people don't know and might never have heard of it. And it's in Spain. It's near Seville, modern Seville, near-ish. And it was massive. I think the Carthaginians had 75,000, and the Romans, Scipio had 50,000.
Yeah.
And it's massive. It's one of those ones that, it's just like in World War II, there are giant battles that most people have never heard of.
Yeah.
You know, like Kursk, or like the Battle of Smolensk or something. A giant, like dwarf the entire Western European theatre, and that most people have never heard of it. You know, if you're not Russian or Ukrainian, you probably never even heard of it. But so I think this is one of those. Ilipa, it's pretty obscure.
Yeah, I'm actually not very familiar with it. I've heard the name, but looking at it, I don't remember reading about it.
Well, that's the one where Mago and Gisco are defeated.
Right.
Scipio and Scipio wins, and so that's the one where really the Carthaginian power in Spain is broken for
Right.
good. For good, then really,
Yeah.
and Scipio can return to Rome and have a triumph, and he's sort of the golden boy. He's sort of a really high political ebb.
Yes.
Yeah, and so he comes back to Rome, and as I said, that what I hinted at just a minute ago, there's now this sort of political wrangling of whether we're going to stick with Fabius. And Fabius is, as you probably guess,
Well,
sort of in character to stick to his way of doing things to the bitter end. He argues his corner just to the bitter end. He will refuse to ever acknowledge that this hot-headed young man has got the right idea.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Fabius is like the arch conservative. So like you can tell it's very much like his character is to be like he's almost the model of a classic Roman patrician. But yeah, no, I mean, but Scipio's got a lot of political capital. I mean, he has just conquered Spain for Rome, so I don't know. I guess it was persuasive. I'd probably be persuaded. You've got to finish the war by actually striking at Carthage. And the thing is, the Romans are reluctant to do this as well because previously, after having tried to do this, they lost 30,000 men or something in the First Punic War. So the idea of this great, and Africa is a long way away to the Roman mind. This Spain is like fighting in the New World to the Europeans and in the colonies. It's a long way away. And so it's a long way away, and it's surrounded in mystery and danger, and so I can see why Fabius's argument would be where it's coming from. But Scipio is obviously right. You do have to strike at Carthage, or else the war is actually never going to end.
Yeah, it's a really good reference you said there that they in the First Punic War the Romans sent over some sort of expeditionary force to Tunisia or to Carthage, and it was an ignominious failure. And so people in Rome at this moment sort of say, well, don't you remember that? We don't want to recreate that, do we? What we've been doing so far, even if it's taken a decade or more, it has been working. Let's just keep doing this. It's nearly won it for us. Let's not throw it all away on the chance on a flip of a coin. In Plutarch he says that Fabius was sort of guilty of introducing a quote an element of personal rivalry and ambition into the conflict. He made it sort of personal between Scipio, like, who is this upstart? I am the leading man of the state.
Well, that's a fair point on his part, really. He's been leading this war effort against Hannibal for decades, almost, like a decade. And, Scipio comes along and goes, no, I know how to do this better. It's like, well,
Yeah, this kid has stolen his limelight. And he's bitter about it.
You can see why, I'd be annoyed too. Fuck off, kid. You're going to get everyone killed. I mean, look, the stakes are high.
Yeah, it could be higher. But it seems that Fabius had I suppose his faction were more powerful because the Senate decided on the assembly, the Senate decided to not give him or not grant him loads of troops. Scipio wants loads of troops to go and attack Carthage in North Africa. And the Senate say, look, you can have a command. Okay, you can do it. We're giving you command, but we're not going to assign you legions and things. You have to sort of raise them out of your own money. Or one of the things that gets mentioned in all the sources is that there were still the remnants of a couple of legions down in Sicily. The remnants of a couple of legions
of Cannae,
that survived Cannae. That's right, and they'd been sort of banished down there in shame. It's kind of, and like 10 years has passed. No, more than that, like 14 years has passed, something like that. And Scipio can go down there, and he does, and he's got a few more men. And he trains them over a year or so to be sort of crack troops. That's what they say. Again, a bit of a montage, montage of them all training and becoming really good. And you can imagine it's like these survivors of Cannae. This is their shot at redemption. This is going to be their moment to actually redeem themselves.
But what I find interesting is the energy that Scipio has is very reminiscent of the energy that Hannibal had when he was invading. Right, like he's got a plan and he knows how to put it into practice. He's got the skills to make that happen, and he knows what the results are going to be. And so, like, Scipio's got all this mad energy where he's going around doing all of this stuff after winning in Spain and all of it. So he's a guy who's you can see the star rising, and it feels very much like Hannibal's entrance into Italy up to Cannae. You can feel it rising.
Yeah, the parallels in their lives there. And what about the parallel where you're asking, you're on the, you've got the momentum with you, but and all you need is a bit more money and men, and your Senate says no, just get it done with what you've got. Both of them had that same dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, Carthage, like I said in the previous one, Carthage did try to help Hannibal at various points during the war, but the defenses that the Romans had, like the ability to prevent sea crossings and things like this, like they were restricted in what they could do, and I guess they were more concerned about Spain. But I do think that the amount that Carthage tried to help was downplayed.
Yeah, quite possibly, yeah. So as well, so and then the next bit, I suppose, we've got to move on to where Scipio, still not Africanus, but where Scipio
hasn't even set foot in Africa yet.
Yeah. Cornelius Scipio the Younger does go across to North Africa, and there's a couple of battles before the big one there. The big one is Zama or Zama. Do you say Zama or Zama? Doesn't really matter.
Zama. Zama. I don't know. Zama, I think, is normally how people pronounce it.
But before that, I mean, a couple of years pass, or just over a year, more than a year, between him first landing and that battle. Between them, actually, a fair bit goes on.
Yeah, loads goes on.
I suppose one. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the exact timeline for the Africa campaign actually, but doesn't he go to the Allies first? He goes. Yeah, he goes straight to Massinissa, doesn't he?
So Massinissa, the king or the prince, he has famously been a sort of stalwart for the Barca family, for the Carthaginians. He was there in all the big battles, Cannae and stuff.
Yeah, it's the Numidian cavalry that is doing all the damage.
How many times did they win the day for Hannibal?
Almost every time, because it was their flexibility.
Yeah,
he took advantage of. Without that flexibility, he's got a real problem.
Yeah, the Numidian cavalry under Massinissa is just really badass, isn't it? Totally. And they switch sides. They sort of decide, but by this point, sort of 203, the Romans are it looks like already you would have thought that it's going their way, and so he's not married to the Carthaginian Senate, so he switched sides. And now there's one thing about
absolute
that.
Scum.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, Scipio could have been defeated in Africa, like there's no particular reason why, if Massinissa had just stayed with the Carthaginians, that they couldn't have just brought Hannibal back, given him the full army that he would have required, and then just crushed Scipio. There's no reason that couldn't have happened.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Zama, it's not. The numbers in the end don't reflect, I think, how close that battle was.
Yes.
But we'll get to that in a minute. But that Massinissa, he, well, of course, he was responsible in many ways, if not in a very real, direct sense, for the killing of lots and lots of Romans, if not like consuls and. Well, maybe even he was at one of the I think that he was at the battle where Scipio's dad, Scipio the Elder, was killed.
Oh, before Trasimene.
No, in Spain, the one where he actually was killed. The Beatis.
Right.
One of the, I don't know how you pronounce that. But anyway, you could forgive Scipio the Younger for holding some sort of blood feud against Massinissa, but he doesn't. I suppose the politics of it is that he does sort of need him at that moment anyway, because as we said, he goes across with this well-trained or supposedly well-trained sort of crack army, but it's not massive. It's not gigantic. It's not like as we say, they're not going to just steamroller Carthage with no question. No. So he does need him on his side. And there's the first battle they win, and then the second one is the Battle of the Great Plains, where Scipio and Massinissa beat the Carthaginians, and that's when the Carthaginian Senate sends back to.
Well, there are a few battles before that, aren't there? There's Utica twice and Capua.
Right, Utica's. Yeah, so Utica's relatively. That's the first one, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's fairly relatively near to Carthage. And once they've got that, that's just sort of a perfect base of operations in North Africa for them, isn't it?
Yeah. At what point is Hannibal called back?
So I think he's
Got to be after Great Plains, isn't it?
yeah, I think he isn't called back until after that. And then he gets the word, and he's sort of been languishing in the very, very south of Spain, of Italy, and he's sort of very reluctant. I mean, it's the end of his dream, isn't it?
Yeah,
To
totally.
have to abandon Italy.
Yeah, he should
But
have
he
marched on
does.
Rome when he had the opportunity.
Yeah, when he had that
Told
little
you.
window after
Yeah,
Cara.
shouldn't have been so arrogant, Hannibal.
Yeah.
But the Battle of the Great Plains is interesting because it makes the Carthaginians look totally incompetent.
Yeah, I think the Carthaginians have only really can call upon conscripts. Really, they
Mm.
might be able to put tens of thousands of guys into the field, on paper at least, but they're not great, and they haven't got a genius mind leading them.
And don't they sue for peace?
Well, I think the Carthaginian, well, and yeah, they do, and they've got no intention of. So I think the Carthaginian Senate to the Romans ask for peace, but at the same time send the message to Hannibal to come back.
Yeah,
So it's they're being very duplicitous.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because there's a break in the narration here, if I recall correctly, and we don't actually know how Hannibal gets back. He just appears back in Africa with 10,000 veterans.
Yeah, well, Polybius's account is very broken up. We've got the first 5 or 6 books, or first 5 books, and then a bit of 6, and then a bit of 18. But there's loads of it missing again.
Yeah.
And Livy is good. I think the best source really for the later portion of the Second Punic War. But yeah, so then if Livy for whatever reason, didn't decide to go into detail about that, then we've got nothing.
Yeah.
He talks much about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Hannibal's after Great Plains, obviously they need Hannibal. Hannibal somehow gets back, and it's just like, well, how did he just ferry his army back, or what's whatever? Because what he brings back are the Spanish and African troops that he still has with him. And I think it's really interesting that after he starts with about 20,000 at the beginning of the Italian campaign that are Iberian and Libyan. And by the end of it, he's still got 10,000 of them after 16 years. Like that's hell of a good survival odds if you're one of those guys, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. That inner core, the guys that he ends up taking back to Africa with him, seem to be they always say they're just like this really, really elite crack unit of ultra loyalists that are also, they're veterans, to say the least. They're just excellent at their job now.
They must have been tremendous soldiers.
And the type that they will die for Hannibal. No question.
They will.
So when he gets So when he gets back to North Africa, he hasn't been there since he was about 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah,
he's coming back, and he's now sort of in his is he 40 odd, something like that, or early
in his 40s, 50s.
So it's sort of a foreign land to him in a way.
Yeah.
And they say he's able to raise levies and a conscript army from Carthage to boost his numbers, because when the final battle does happen, I think the numbers are that he's actually got more men than Scipio.
Yes, but it's not by much. I'm just checking the Wikipedia article now.
From memory, is it something like he's got 35 and Scipio's got 25, or
yeah, well,
something?
It says that Scipio had 35 and he had 40,000.
Right.
And then Scipio's army's experienced as well. And so Hannibal's actually at the disadvantage. He's got the cavalry disadvantage because now the Numidians are with Scipio, so he just has Libyan or whatever other cavalry that he has. But he's also got a definite disadvantage in the fact that he's 3/4 of his army is made up of raw recruits who haven't actually fought a battle, or at least not in this organization. So Hannibal's got real problems. And one of the things I found, I don't want to spoil anything, but I always thought that Hannibal kind of felt like he was fighting for the sake of fighting, right? I think at this point Hannibal realizes how the war is ending and just goes through the motions. This doesn't feel like the old Hannibal to me. And it's quite frustrating. And it's because of the way that he begins his conflict against Scipio that bothers me. Because Scipio, isn't he like Utica on the coast and then strikes inland for some reason to presumably to capture another town or something like that. And Hannibal, rather than like doing a Fabius, just does a Roman and just marches straight out to confront him. And it's like, why do you need to do that? Like, you don't, you've got a bit of time. The terrain isn't exactly something that Scipio is familiar with. You can probably set up a clever trap and just annihilate his entire army if you wanted, because you are Hannibal. That is literally what you do. And yet he doesn't do anything of the sort. He just marches straight towards him as fast as he can.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's interesting. It seems like he's sort of out of ideas, or well, again, it's one of those things where we've got the Roman picture of it, and it might be that by this stage or by this sort of era of the war, the Roman accounts have sort of taken over a bit.
It could be.
What I mean is, well, there's this really quite famous bit. People probably know if you know anything about the Second Punic War. One of the most famous things that always get mentioned in documentaries is that Scipio and Hannibal are supposed to have met on the field and had a little one-to-one, a little conversation before the battle, and they would have never met before or anything. And it's sort of the great meeting of minds, a sort of a brilliant moment in history when they have a little back and forth. But, and we'll talk about that in some detail if you like, because it's kind of cool and interesting. Totally. But one of the things that modern historians have said, or any secondary historian, don't have to be modern, have said that the way Hannibal is portrayed in that it seems like a different Hannibal. It's a completely different character. It's not what you think he would say or anything like that. It doesn't act how you would expect. And so it's probably a case where Polybius and Livy and whoever wrote after them, that they've just painted Hannibal a certain way, and it's not really got anything to do with reality.
Entirely possible. I mean, that is totally possible. But I mean, I also think that it's feasible that Hannibal's character changed over his time in Italy.
I can completely believe that. He's a bit broken. He's a bit of a different man now.
I'm not saying, I don't think I'd say broken. I think that's not the right answer. He's not a hopeless man. And we see after the war how he goes on to try and do what he can in the grand struggle against the Roman. It's not that he's broken. I think that he just thinks this war is over.
Right.
I think that's because you notice that I can't remember exactly word for word what they say to each other, obviously, because it's been a while since I read it. But you'll notice that Hannibal's tone is conciliatory. He doesn't want to have the fight. He says, well, it can go either way. And it sounds like to me, he's going, look, I know I'm going to lose this. Mm-hmm. And so let's not do this. All these men don't have to die. And we can just come to terms, that is basically what he's saying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly it. He goes on for quite a while.
Yeah.
And he's saying all things like, basically, the thrust is, you don't have to do this. We're prepared to sort of treat with you. We don't have to have all this bloodshed. Don't do it. And one of the things I've heard a modern historian describe it as is that Hannibal kind of comes across as a second-hand car salesman, they said. He's sort of pleading in a way. He's saying, give me some respect. Don't you remember how close I was to Rome, and I had mercy on you. I didn't destroy you. Don't you remember that? And all this sort of thing. It's a little bit pathetic, a little bit.
That's not that. It is the speech of a man who knows he's beaten, right? And I think this is why Hannibal marches at Scipio without trying to win, right? Because it looks to me like he just wants to get it over with. He knows right now the Romans are here. We're not going to be able to fight them off. We may as well just get this over with, get the peace treaty done, and then I can carry on doing whatever it is I'm going to do. To beat Rome in some other way. But he seems to completely understand that the campaign is over, the war is over, and the only problem is the formality of this battle is in the way. And he seems to just want to get past that as quickly as possible with as little bloodshed as possible.
Yeah, and Scipio, in that famous meeting, Scipio essentially says, like, I don't owe you anything, bitch.
Yeah.
Like, like my dad and uncle have been killed in this, and I was even wounded, and kind of, as if we're going to stop now, Hannibal. Are you joking? Kind of thing. That's his response.
Yeah.
But it is sort of, again, sort of probably propaganda, because he just comes across as this implacable, shining example of Roman nobility.
I'm sure that Scipio would absolutely say that his position, because he's going to be the one that's reporting it, surely.
Yeah.
So,
well, apparently he did write a history.
Yeah.
He wrote a history, I believe, which is lost now. But I think Plutarch mentions it at one point. So I mean, the die is cast. They do have to have this last big battle, Zama, in North Africa, on a really dusty plain, apparently it is.
Yep.
And I suppose this is... sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, do you want me to describe it, or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, be my guest.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's a really dusty plain. It's Africa, it's a very wide, very flat. There's no trickery involved at all, and this is why I can't help but think that Hannibal's just like, well, we just have to get this over with, But he's been given, I don't know, 16 elephants or something like that, but they're not trained. So they're not really very controllable. So all they can do is charge the elephants forward. And then behind them, he puts the raw recruits. And then behind them, he puts his veterans. So the raw recruits basically can't run away. And also what he's doing is an effective sort of defense in depth. So the plan being, presumably, to wear out the Roman troops before they engage with his veterans, who can then crush them. So they're fresh towards the end of the battle. They'll be fresh, hopefully. But I think he knows that this is a foregone conclusion because the Numidian cavalry aren't with him, and he knows just how good the Numidian cavalry is, and they are amazing. And so he lines up his numerically superior but tactically inferior army, and in just these three lines. And the Romans come on, and so it begins with him charging the elephants forward. But the Romans are prepared for this. Scipio, having a brain, just gets the Romans to funnel into channels, and the elephants go down these channels rather than trying to actually trample through hordes of men. And these, get javelins thrown at them, and they're just fresh elephants, so that they just run off, and so they do nothing. And then it goes to the new lines, and obviously the recruits just get cut up. And then it comes to the sort of long press and the real meat grinder at the end against the veterans. And the cavalry, the Numidian cavalry, chase off Hannibal's cavalry, being worse, obviously, numerically inferior and less well battle hardened. And then they come back at the end and do a Hannibal and hit his men in the rear, and that's it. And that's the end of the battle. All his men die, and Hannibal flees back to Carthage.
That's right. Like, how many times did Massinissa and the Numidian cavalry sort of come back and finish the encirclement maneuver, just like at Cannae, and win a day? And he does it to Hannibal. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's amazing, because you would think that there would be some kind of bond of friendship between them after so many years of campaigning, and so many victories. You would think that there would be something that would prevent Massinissa from doing this. But no, and the Numidians is like, no, this is fine. All those veterans that we spent 16 years fighting with, we're just going to kill them now. It's like, okay.
Well, just quickly on Massinissa, one of the things he wanted, he was the prince of Numidia, and he wanted to be the king, and there was another claimant there. And one of the things was that the Romans said, we'll guarantee you the full kingship if you side with us. And that is, in fact, what he gets. It's what he sort of always wanted all along. And so, that's sort of his main reasoning for doing that. He's not slimy or backstabby for the sake of it. He
great, backstabby for the sake of a title. Oh, how good.
In Livy, if I read a quick small paragraph from Livy, just there was the Romans had two wings of cavalry. One was Massinissa, and the other one was actual Roman cavalry under a guy called Laelius. So it says this quote: Laelius and Massinissa had pursued the routed cavalry for a considerable distance. Now, at the right moment, they wheeled around and charged into the rear of the enemy's line. It was this cavalry attack which finally defeated the Carthaginians. Many were surrounded and cut down where they stood. Many were scattered in flight over the open plain, only to fall everywhere beneath the cavalry, the undisputed masters of the field. More than 20,000 of the Carthaginians and their allies were killed on that day, and about the same number captured, together with 132 military standards and 11 elephants. The Romans lost about 1,500 men.
Yeah.
So I think even sorry.
But like you said earlier, that it belies how likely how close the battle was.
Yeah.
Because Scipio did say that there were points where he thought he was going to lose it, didn't he?
Yeah, apparently it was in the press of men.
Mm.
It was very finely balanced for most of the day. Apparently,
Mm.
it could have gone either way. And at one point towards the end, just before that cavalry came back and completely won the day.
Yeah.
Apparently, the Carthaginians were sort of beginning to punch holes through the legionary line, and it looked like it might waver. But then in the end, as we've said before, in ancient battles, when one side sort of collapses a bit, that's when the numbers just sort of start looking really one-sided, when in fact it was actually a close run thing. Or like at Cannae, they say it was a close run thing.
Yeah, it's not like modern warfare where everyone gets shot by a gun. When you've got guys wearing armor, carrying shields, and then actively defending themselves, the press of it, like it is a press. It's like a rugby scrum. That's how that's the description. That's the feeling that comes across from it, isn't it? Because you've just got these two boards of wood pressed against each other and trying to stab around, and you hitting the helmet or whatever, And so it's you can't just kill without rampantly. They've got to stop defending themselves for you to be able to kill them easily, which means when they're trying to run away. But yeah.
Well, one last thing I'd say about Zama, that's probably worth pointing out, was that the ultra veteran cores of both armies were at Cannae.
Yeah.
They were both there, so it was sort of like a round two for a lot of them.
It certainly would have been.
In Plutarch, he says, quote, Scipio would have to meet an army which was still reeking with the blood of many generals, dictators, and consuls, which puts it quite poetically, I think.
Yeah.
But no, so he is completely successful there, and so a lot of people might think, okay, well that means the sacking of Carthage, and they'll all be sold into slavery or killed. Certainly Hannibal's going to be executed, isn't he? But that's not how it goes down.
Well, yeah. What's really interesting is the terms, which I find staggering, absolutely staggering. Because after this, obviously Scipio, you would think he would press harder, but they're really light, aren't they? Like the war indemnity is not very much for the Carthaginians to bear, considering the amount of money they make. And I mean, what does he even ask of them? It's not even that much, is it?
So the terms are something like this. I think it's 10,000 silver talents, or whatever you want, whatever coinage they've got. 10,000.
Yeah, talents is a weight.
They've got 50 years to pay that back. And a lot of people might know they end up paying it back much sooner than that to Romans.
The Romans end up refusing their offer to pay it back sooner because they want the Carthaginians under the thumb for longer. This is the thing. Like, I'm surprised that the Carthaginians don't just accept a Roman governor at some point, because I don't want to skip ahead to the third one or anything, but like I always found this really weird that the Romans felt the need to actually eradicate the Carthaginians, because like the Carthaginians, they don't really seem to want to actually be in charge. They just want to be able to get on with their lives and conduct trade, and they would be able to do that perfectly well under Roman protection, and they would surely be an amazing tax base for the Romans. So I always found it really bizarre that the Romans literally couldn't stand to have them in existence. But I guess after what Hannibal showed that Carthage is capable of, maybe that was the
I think the third thing was quite a lot of psychology in their paranoia and things, and different types of politics going on. But just at the end of this second Punic War, where Scipio can force them into a capitulation, it's sort of 10,000 talents, and they're to disband all their navy, which they have to do. And I think the Romans end up scuppering maybe hundreds or dozens and dozens of Carthaginian ships just out to sea, just off the coast, just sinking them, so they can never have a navy again. They give up all their foreign possessions, every last bit of it.
They're confined to Africa, aren't they?
Yeah.
But their holdings in Africa are protected by the Romans.
Yeah, then one of the terms was that they're not allowed to declare war unless the Romans okay it. So, I mean, right there, that's sort of taking away a huge chunk of your liberty, isn't it? Really, I mean, you're in a sense a vassal state at that point, aren't you? I think?
Yeah. I mean, they are. Yeah, this is a form of vassalage. But you would think they would just accept a Roman governor and just be like, whatever, just get on with it. You run the show. Whatever. If this is how it's got to be, because you can tell it's not in the Carthaginian spirit to be like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? Right. So it's not I mean, do they hand over hostages?
I don't believe so. I mean,
No, I don't think they
Hannibal
did.
isn't taken prisoner. I think he's allowed his libertine to stay in Carthage, isn't he?
Yeah, well, yeah, but and this is staggering. Like this, I couldn't believe it when I read this. Right, so like, I mean, normally you would take noble hostages, like you take the sons of 600 noble families or something like that, and then they go back to Rome and be raised as Roman nobles to further like produce ties between the two cities and stuff, and to make sure the Carthaginians knew that if you revolt, we're going to kill these kids. So and I say kids, but they could be adults. But yeah, and like. Okay, so Carthage can't have overseas territory, but it retains its African holdings, which are extensive. And so this Carthage has still got a large power base from which it can draw. And yeah, okay, they can't declare war without the Roman approval. But I mean, if Carthage is thinking about becoming on the rise again and getting back into the game, they're not going to listen to that anyway. And what's really, it's really weird how 10,000 talents is not a lot of money. I mean, for a state, it's not a lot of money. For an individual, obviously, it's a lot of money. But there are people who have 10,000 talents. There are people who do acquire this kind of level of wealth, and so like it's really not that stringent. They don't prevent the Carthaginians from trading in certain ports or anything like that, and all this sort of stuff. There are all manner of things that they could have demanded, but most importantly, and as you say, Hannibal is allowed to just stay in Carthage. And you would think, Christ, the architect of hundreds of thousands of dead Romans, the guy who led the invasion, the guy who kicked off the war, the guy who began all of it. They demanded Hannibal for punishment at the beginning of the war when he sacked Saguntum, in violation of a treaty. You would think at the end of it, they'd be like, okay, look, fine. You can exist. We won't keep coming after you. We'll have the peace treaty. You can pay us the 10,000 talents back. We know it's not much to you, but you have to give us Hannibal like we wanted at the beginning of all of this because he is dangerous to us. You'd think they'd be able to argue that very precisely, but Scipio doesn't even suggest it, does he?
Yeah, and that is an interesting thing. Why not? Why not? A lot of people have said that it may well be, or if this is the case, it kind of would explain it, but we don't know for sure, that Scipio really, really respected Hannibal. Hannibal's, even by that point, sort of a legendary figure to the Romans, albeit an antagonist, but he's like the older man, and he's something of a hero or an anti-hero to Scipio. And so it seems that he did. I mean, it kind of would explain it. He just had a great deal of respect for him because when Scipio goes back to Rome after winning this war, he gets a triumph and things, and is hailed as a great hero, one of the leading men in the state now. But also, there's a massive faction saying, "What? Well, where is he? He's dead, right? Or you brought him back, didn't you? Like,
why aren't you displaying your captive in your triumph? Shouldn't we be strangling him to death in the middle of the forum at the minute? Because that's what we do with defeated enemies after triumphs. Where's Hannibal? Come on! I mean, we've got the bluest balls in the world here. We've been waiting nearly 20 years for this day. Bring him out, and it's like, oh, I just left him in Carthage. What? You left him in charge of the enemy city. Yeah, he's fine. He's fine. He's going to sort it out, apparently. Which is what he does.
You sort of can't blame, well, in a way, that you can't blame that faction in Rome that are really pissed off with Scipio. Like, what bloody hell, really? This is going to drag on now. Come on.
That's the thing. It's literally this. It's such a bizarro world decision on Scipio's part. But this is why I think there was genuinely a kind of I think they did have a kind of bead on each other, like the motivations of each other. Because Scipio wasn't just doing this for fame. The Scipio obviously had some kind of higher minded ideal involved, and it was like it seemed that Hannibal had, like, these sort of, I get, in all the sources they call it the Greek way of looking at things, and it's about bringing this state to bow, or to understand that there are rules that by which states fight, and after 3 consecutive and decisive losses, you should go to the person that you've lost to and then concede what they're asking for, give them whatever they want from you, and then the war's over. And it seems like Scipio felt that way too at the end of this war. He seems to have wanted to beat Hannibal on his own terms. And so when it comes to the end of it, his terms are actually really reasonable, and he doesn't even go after Hannibal. It's so weird.
It is a surprise. It does seem like a surprising decision. Yeah. but he sort of pays for it politically because the rest of Scipio's life. I mean,
it's all downhill from here, Scipio. Sorry, buddy.
I mean, it's after this he gets the title Africanus. Master of Africa is one way to describe what that is. So he is at Mr. Africa, Scipio Africanus, and but yeah, even just I think only a year or two after. Both him and his brother, who was out doing stuff in the east, as we said, in Macedonia and Illyria, Lucius, both of them are sort of indicted and put on trial.
Yeah,
for
swindling money or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, they tried to get them on like an Al Capone style thing, like tax evasion or embezzlement of some type.
Yeah,
and
probably nonsense. Probably nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's sort of trumped up charges.
Yeah,
and you can imagine both the Scipio brothers just feel like this is such ingratitude. We sort of saved the Republic, and now you're trying to screw us out of everything. There's one nice little story, I think, where the first day of his trial, he stands up and says, sort of, "Fuck this! I'm going off to a temple to right now. I'm going to walk off and go up to a temple on one of the hills and have a sacrifice to my great victories." And he goes and leaves the courtroom and does that. And apparently everyone other than the prosecution follow him up there. And that's sort of the end of the day's court proceedings for that day. And it just speaks volumes that everyone went with him. And I mean, imagine that nowadays if someone was in court and they did that.
Well, yeah, but there's no knocking Scipio's fame and popularity with the public. Like he's not popular with the other patricians or whatever. But I mean, like the average citizen of Rome. Oh look, there goes Scipio Africanus. The guy defeated Hannibal and saved us all from death. Like thank God for this guy.
Yeah, and this story plays out again and again and again, especially in the next few generations. That any general or any consul or proconsul who's fantastically popular and successful, it's kind of the rest of the state, if you like, turns against them and tries to destroy them because they're just terrified of a dictator, really. Even though Scipio doesn't seem a king, but Scipio doesn't seem to have been angling for that, and yet nevertheless he gets treated very poorly.
Yeah, no, he doesn't even slightly come across to me as someone who's looking to be crowned king of Rome. And but the thing is, that's the kind of irrational slur that's just projected on anyone. You say, and they do this all the time. Right up until like Caesar. Oh, he wants to be the king. He wants to be the king. And it's like, like you say that to everyone. But I mean, they probably did. He probably did want to become the king, but
What, Caesar?
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But,
well, when you get yourself in inverted commas voted dictator for life, I mean, there's not many ways you can spin it.
Yeah, you practically are. Yeah.
I mean, Scipio's sort of there's a few more things to talk about, but he does puts himself under a self-imposed exile and sort of deliberately lives outside of Rome for the rest of his life. And on his gravestone, because fuck you, that's why.
You won't even have my bones or something, ungrateful fatherland.
That's it, on his gravestone, exactly that. I mean, you can only read into that he's massively embittered.
Yeah, well, he feels betrayed.
Well, you would do, wouldn't you?
But that's the thing. I think that Scipio and Hannibal were living in a kind of romantic world of, this is how things should be. It should be that we have these noble, honorable treatment of people who do great deeds. He's probably thinking in the sort of Greek vein of heroism. I think this was a dominant worldview among many people, and it was probably Hannibal who's responsible for destroying it by just the sheer bloodthirstiness of his destruction of the Romans. But yeah, like the world's changed by the time Scipio has finished, and he's not the guy that the Romans, like the Senate and the aristocracy, want. He's actually like a kind of old hat. Like, everyone's now out for blood, and all the traditions are suddenly kind of window dressing to the realpolitik of the thing. And you can see why Scipio would feel betrayed, backstabbed by his own people. And I bet at the end of it, he thought about Hannibal a lot after the victory. I bet he thought about his interactions with Hannibal and like on all sort of all kinds. I bet it's something that he never stopped thinking about.
Yeah, well, they have one last meeting, according to Livy, right towards the end, about to tie up a few.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, tie up a few loose ends.
Yeah, we'll go through the end of what happens to Hannibal afterwards in a minute.
If I could just mention Fabius. Fabius dies just
Yes.
sort of old age of sort of natural causes, sort of just before, a month or a year or two before Zama. So he never actually gets to see the end of it all. But he too dies quite an embittered man. Well, just ultra jealous, really, of Scipio. But yeah, he has a bit of a bitter end as well. But that's sort of the end of him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose finally with Hannibal, I suppose after the Battle of Zama, and he isn't imprisoned or killed. There's one little story I think is quite interesting where there were still people within the, well, just before they signed this last peace treaty. Well, it's not the last one, but before they signed that peace treaty with Scipio, apparently there's still a faction within Carthage that sort of want to refuse peace and fight on. And Hannibal apparently is sort of on the floor. Yeah, like physically rips them from the podium or something.
Yeah. But the thing is, you got to imagine it, because like you're going to have a bunch of fat merchants sat around, fat businessmen who are sat around in the Carthaginian Senate, and Hannibal is going to come in there like he must have looked like a tank. He must have been covered in scars. He's got an eye patch over one eye, probably arms like fucking oaks. And these, no, we want more. And he just grabs the guy, he yanks it, and he's like, no one's going to step in and stop him. It's Hannibal.
Yeah. It's Hannibal Barca, the heir of Hamilcar himself. He is sort of a living legend, very much so. And so within the next couple of years, he gains a position, sort of the senior man in the state. And he sort of controls policy.
It's hard to identify exactly, like you were saying earlier, like what's his official role, and his official role is obviously at the beginning, the guy who goes and fights the foreign wars for Carthage. You go and kill Carthage enemies. You're not needed in the Senate. You haven't stepped foot in this city since you were 9 years old. You're not needed here. We just want to pay you to go and kill people for us, right? And that's what Hannibal's great at. And so when he comes back, it's like it's Hannibal and the entire Senate that are just two different entities. And Hannibal now is just squatting on top of them, like telling them, no, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do the other. And I guess his voice must have just carried so much weight or something, because I don't even know where he gets the authority.
Yeah, I think at some point he is voted some sort of formal position. But yeah, then, sorry.
Even then, he's not given dictatorial powers or anything, and yet he still just starts all of these reforms that starts pulling money out of the woodwork of all the Carthaginian noblemen. It's like, oh yeah, where was this all hiding when we were fighting the Romans? You can just imagine how Hannibal was looking at this. It's like, oh, we could have used this, couldn't we?
Yeah, and it seems his leadership is great because Carthage is a bit like a phoenix rising from the flames.
Yeah.
As we said earlier, they're able to pay off that war indemnity super quick. And it seems that their maritime or their commercial empire is far from annihilated, and they're sort of, as I say, just rising up, growing up from the ashes.
Their
the roses of success.
Trade. I mean, I did recently reread Harold Lamb's account of it, but I can't remember exactly what his trade reforms are. I'm just going to check the Wikipedia quickly. He basically, so he's elected Suffet, which is chief magistrate of the state. So after an audit confirmed Carthage has the resources to pay the indemnity without increasing taxation. So Hannibal initiated a reorganization of state finances aimed at eliminating corruption and recovering embezzled funds. Like, what did this guy ever do that wasn't noble and good?
Yeah, he was acting in Carthage's interest, certainly, doesn't it? He actually had their interest at heart.
Absolutely. Everything he does is for the interest of Carthage. So you've got to really quite like him. But basically, he reduces the power of the oligarchs, the 104, and he passes various laws. So they've got to be chosen by election rather than buying their way in, and things like that. So he introduced a rule so that none can hold office for 2 consecutive years, as well. So he's implementing democratic reforms and rooting out corruption. And like you say, he finds that, oh no, we've got all the money we'll ever need here. We don't even need to increase taxes. And it's like, you can see why the Romans are like, he can't stay.
and the Carthaginian oligarchs. I mean, it's a dangerous game to start playing with oligarchs' business. When you start messing with their money, you've got to be careful.
And one thing that Lamb goes on to as well is that Hannibal owns estates in Carthage because his family owns them. And as part of his reforms, he ends up losing parts of his property. And I find that really interesting because, like, at no point does Hannibal come across as avaricious. You know, he uses money purely for strategic goals, strategic aims. And so he never seems to actually enrich himself at all across the course of his career. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, again, he doesn't. I suppose he could have this period of time when he's sort of the leading man in Carthage. He could have made the whole thing like his personal fief.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. As we say, he sort of roots out corruption. It's really good, isn't it? It's noble. Well, he's so thorough, or sort
He does
of
his
tries
civic
to do.
duty.
Yeah, he has a sense of civic duty. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that. Well, and that doesn't go down well with a lot of people.
Well, not with the corrupt oligarchs. No, why would it go down well with them? Jesus. I bet Hannibal was super popular when he was walking around the marketplace, though.
Yeah, the people would have.
I bet they loved him, you know.
But he ends up, I suppose, playing, failing to play the game politic well enough, because in the end, he is ousted and has to flee from Carthage, doesn't he?
Well, yeah. The Romans are worried about him, aren't they? Understandably so, worrying that he's because the Romans have been expanding east at this point, and they're worried that he's in contact with Antiochus of Syria, the Seleucid Empire, isn't he?
Yeah, so when he is he feels the dragnet closing around him, or he realizes that his political position in Carthage is, at some point, he decides it's untenable and leaves, and he goes by boat to Tyre, because of course
the
we
mother
said that,
city of Carthage.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's sort of it is their mother city, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tyre. So it goes to Phoenicia and flees there for a start. But it's sort of one of those things. I liken it to, sometimes in the modern period that the Americans or the FBI or whoever, the American military, decide they want you. Whether it's Julian Assange or Uday Hussein or Noriega or Pablo Escobar or Roman Polanski. When they decide, saying Uday Hussein and Roman Polanski in the same breath, sounds right.
Well, I mean, he did rape a child, so
yeah, they're both monsters. Monsters. When the FBI decide that they want you, they never give up. You are actually a bit screwed. They are going to hunt you down if they can, and that's sort of that's what happens with Hannibal. Rome decides they're going to go to the ends of the earth to get this guy. Like they want to stop him breathing at all costs. Yeah, so it becomes like a dragnet type thing.
Yeah, and this is why he flees to Antiochus. Now, Antiochus is the Great. He's Antiochus the Great. He's a famous commander in his own right. He's won a bunch of wars in the East. He's the commander of a massive empire, like the inheritor of Alexander's Asian Empire. He's famous, unbelievably wealthy. He's got a professional army. So you would think, okay, if Hannibal's going to go to anyone, because who's going to go to war with Rome, and Hannibal goes to the enemies of Rome as well. You'd think this is a good place to go, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he needs to find a new sponsor, a new sugar daddy. He needs someone that will give him an army to continue his lifelong struggle against Rome. There's one good little story. I don't know if it's at the court of Antiochus or not. I think it might be, but I'm not sure. Where someone sort of starts wondering or questioning Hannibal's loyalties. And Hannibal tells them that story of when he was a little boy and he swore to his dad that he would never be a friend of Rome, no matter what. And apparently that convinces them. They're like, oh yeah, no, sorry, you're quite right. Of course you hate Rome.
Yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? Because I'm referring to what I read with Harold Lamb the other day. At one point, because Hannibal doesn't do court politics well at all. Just like he didn't do Republican politics in Carthage well. Hannibal is very clearly molded in the great man of history form, and I think Scipio is the same. And I think this is why because they both end up really resenting their home. Well, I don't know if Hannibal probably did resent his home, but they both end up being not poor leaders, but politically mismanaging. their situation at home, and it seems that they both were happiest when on campaign, when actually active and doing something. And this when he's in Antiochus's court, like Greek courts are awful. Like they're full of treachery, backstabbing, plots, like power mongering, and Hannibal doesn't do this well. And so he effectively like alienates a bunch of people and gets a lot of suspicion on him. And then at one point, Antiochus confronts him, and he's just like, "I don't even know why you're confronting me. Everything I have said, every suggestion I've made, has been in your best interests, and you know that." And so then he just goes back into the room he's allowed to live in or whatever, and that's it. That's the end of the conversation, And he's just this remarkably like plain spoken and forthright guy. And like every time Antiochus is trying to impress him, or whenever he's at Antiochus' court, and they've got advisors who have come in and say, "Oh, well, we'll do this about the Romans, we'll do that," Hannibal will say stuff like, I've got a quote here. So according to Cicero, while at the court of Antiochus, Hannibal attended a lecture by Phormio, a philosopher, that ranged through many topics. When Phormio finished a discourse on the duties of a general, Hannibal was asked for his opinion. He replied, "I've seen many old fools during my life, but this one beats them all." Hannibal's experience as a general is legendary. It has to be legendary, which is why everyone like this guy's lecturing about generalship. You can imagine all eyes turning to Hannibal, and Hannibal's stony face, just this old fool, like this guy doesn't know anything about war. He's never been on a campaign. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's a great image.
Yeah, I mean, when Hannibal first gets to Antiochus's court, he's just like, "Look, what you want to do is just send, equip a fleet, send a large army to the south of Italy, and just put me at the head of it." And Antiochus being like, "Well, I can't do that. I'm the king. That undermines my authority." Basically, is the response. But you can tell that it's his ego talking rather than like his sense of strategic competence. It's just like, "Look, dude, you've just been gifted a guy who waxes Roman armies for breakfast. Just give him an army. Just see what he does. Just give him one. Go on, send it across. You can do it. It's fine. Let him go deal with the Romans for you. You don't even have to leave the house."
Yeah, I think it's one of those. Well, again, when a general is too powerful, I think of the obvious example. I must have said it in others where Truman and MacArthur. It's like he is a little bit too big for his boots, a little bit worryingly sort of his own man. But yeah, it would have been if he could just see clearly. Hannibal would have been a great general to have, wouldn't he? Of course.
Oh, of course. But the thing is, the thing that's like frustrating is Hannibal at no point in the career that we are given, in the account of his life that we're given by his enemies, comes across as anything other than sincere in his goals. Right? He doesn't lie to people. He doesn't double cross anyone, does he?
Yeah, well, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, and normally it's quite easy to think of when someone double crosses someone. It's usually quite an important narrative point. But I don't think at any point Hannibal does anything other than say, "Look, I'm against Rome, and this is what we're going to do." And so it's frustrating that the Greeks, with I guess what we can call insincere politics, conditioned by insincere politics, would find themselves. It's frustrating. Like again, if you want to see the underdog win, that Antiochus can't see the absolute gold that has just dropped into his lap, and just the pearls that have dropped into his lap here. Because, I mean, imagine having Hannibal in your court and then being like, "Yeah, I'm going to go to war with the Romans." It's like, "Well, God, you're lucky." "Oh no, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to send him." It's like, okay.
Yeah. So I think Hannibal does win some sort of battle or something, but I mean, in the end, this period quite often gets a bit of a montage, doesn't it, when you watch a 45-minute documentary? Because he doesn't end up at Antiochus' court; he bounces around a bit, doesn't he?
Well, no, he does. He does end up in Antiochus' court, and he oversees Antiochus' invasion of Greece, because the Romans have basically told him, "You're not allowed to come across the Bosphorus and enter Europe. You stay in Asia where you belong, and we get to do what we want in Greece." Because of course, after Carthage, the end of the war in Carthage, Rome just consolidates in Spain and Greece, and so this is what's provoking Antiochus into Greece. the Greeks saying, "Hey, Antiochus, aren't you a Greek? Come and help us with these barbarians." And he does, and he takes not even a very big army. Even it's actually it's like 20,000 men or something. It's really not very impressive. But he takes it into Greece, gets thrashed by the Romans at the Battle of Thermopylae. Because everyone and their mother at this point knows exactly how to get around an army that's holding that pass, and then just has to flee back to Asia, and then agrees, signs a peace deal with the Romans, saying, "Yeah, okay, I'll stay on the this side of Asia, and I'll be a good boy," and the Romans can then carry on unmolested by him. And this it's frustrating because he's the king of a great empire. You'd think, if he had any kind of grit to him, he'd be able to prosecute the war too, but he doesn't, and he's terrible, and he gets his men killed and has to flee. And for some reason, he puts Hannibal in charge of a fleet, and Hannibal has this sea battle. And again, one of the reasons I think that at Zama, Hannibal knew that the war with Carthage was over and he just wanted to end it is he doesn't try anything tactical or innovative, but he does try innovation during the sea battle. It's not that he's out of ideas. He apparently gathers loads of poisonous snakes in pots and then throws them onto the enemy boats and stuff, which does cause havoc, but they still lose this naval encounter anyway. But the point is, Hannibal's not a man who's out of ideas, and he's not he's not lacking in energy or anything like that. And so that's why I think that Zama, it was him saying, "No, this war's over. We can't win." But foolishly, Antiochus takes the greatest general alive at the time, and I still think he's better than Scipio, and doesn't use him against the people who he has spent his entire life fighting. It's crazy. It's like, this is such a blunder, Antiochus.
Does Hannibal not end up leaving Antiochus's court and going to someone else's court, and then another one? So he does end up.
Yeah,
he does end up sort of bouncing around between a few different courts before the final end.
After the peace treaty, part of the terms of the treaty is that he gives Hannibal up, and Hannibal then is forced to flee. And
that's right.
But going to Pergamon and the Black Sea somewhere.
Yeah, he definitely ends up in Pergamon at some point. But there's one point. Is that the point just before that where this final meeting? I think at Ephesus. That they're both emissaries. That Scipio Africanus meets again the great Hannibal, and they meet face to face. Apparently,
this is great because there's again you can see there's respect for them because they're asked who are the greatest generals. And I can't remember exactly.
That's the bit, isn't it? When they say who they think the great.
Scipio, is it Scipio who asks? I think Scipio asks.
Yeah, that's right. It starts with Scipio asking Hannibal. Yeah, and Hannibal
who's the greatest general? And he says Alexander, Pyrrhus, then myself, or something.
That's it. Yeah.
And Scipio, going, well, where would you put yourself if you beat me? And he says, I'd put myself first. And it's like, that's a hell of a nice compliment, really, if you think about it, from the guy you defeated. And
it's a compliment to both of them, isn't it? Yes. If you think about it. They're basically saying we're both up there with Alexander.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where it's like that there is definitely respect and some form of nobility and honor that's understood between the two. You don't say things like that about someone you don't have any respect for. And so it's interesting how I bet at that point, Scipio, when he went to bed that night, he was thinking about shit, man. I kind of like this Hannibal guy more than I like those fucking assholes in the Senate. I bet he totally did.
Yeah, he gets me more than they do.
Yeah, exactly. I honestly did. Or was.
But again, just to probably maybe ram it home a bit too much, but the parallels between the two men's lives, because they actually end up both dying in the same year, Scipio of natural causes, and that there are a great many parallels, that they're these great generals of great generaling families that their respective nations have treated very poorly, and they're both sort of up there with the greatest generals ever, certainly of their generations, and so there's just and there's more. If you want to go deeper, there's more parallels between them.
Go ahead. What parallels do you see?
Well, there's loads of how much you want to drill down to. They both lost very close members of their families,
all their brothers,
their brothers and fathers and things. Yeah, absolutely. And that they actually were both on the field together at various points. Their lives lived out in parallel ways.
Yeah, totally.
And that their paths just kept crossing.
Yeah.
And that just a lot with their families seem to mirror
Yeah.
closely their relationship with their father, and that their father sort of taught them and then fell in battle, and there's quite a lot there, and that they end up dying in the same year.
Yeah.
And because, well, I suppose we're getting towards the towards Hannibal's end now. Really, there's
Well, yeah. I
not
mean,
much left.
yeah. Well, he's being pursued by the Romans everywhere, and ends up going. Is it Bithynia, something like that?
Where he finally ends up, is it Bithynia? I think it is somewhere like
Hold
that,
on,
isn't it?
I'm gonna check.
They end up chasing him to the sort of
Yeah.
far-flung corners of the earth, isn't it? More or less.
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating a bit, but
Well, no,
again, it makes me think of Pablo Escobar and the DEA closing in.
yeah.
It's like
Yeah. No,
they're
it is
gonna.
Bithynia. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because he goes to Bithynia, and they threaten the king of Bithynia, whoever was in charge, to give him up, and it's Prusius who's the leader there, and he agrees, but Hannibal hears of it, and then he's got a ring on his finger, hasn't he, that's filled with poison.
Yeah.
That he takes and says, I'll spare the Romans of their hatred of this old man, or something like this.
Yeah, was this something like I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's like bloody Romans, they couldn't even wait for an old man to die.
Yeah,
Something like that.
But the thing is, I can't help but feel that that's probably an invention after the fact, because, I mean, come on, Hannibal, you did also try and help Antiochus invade. I find it hard to believe that Hannibal finds it unreasonable that the Romans want his head. Well, I mean, obviously they do.
After everything.
Yeah, obviously they want you.
I mean, he's on borrowed time.
Yeah.
He's lucky to have got this far.
Yeah, exactly. He's on borrowed time. That's a great way of putting it. They're obviously going to want your head, and this. Come on, don't be silly.
It's still a bit of a sad end, don't you think?
Yeah.
We would hope that maybe he could go out a bit more of a glorious way, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, you are right, because, I mean, at least with Pyrrhus, he dies fighting, like a hero. So Pyrrhus gets like a legendary end, but Hannibal doesn't. Hannibal gets a very bittersweet end. He doesn't get killed by the Romans, which is what the Romans would have wanted for the destruction of his memory. They didn't get to kill him, and bring him home in a triumph and humiliate him or anything like that. But he's forced to poison himself, and there's no sort of glory in it. And so it kind of feels like with the death of Hannibal and Scipio, the age of the sort of heroic, the Homeric leaders is over, and from that point onwards, you get very much more calculating Sulla-esque, Sulla, Marius, Caesar, Pompey, very like Pompey tries to weave the kind of heroic mythos around himself, but he never works because he's Pompey. He's not he's good, but he's not brilliant. But with Scipio and Hannibal, it feels like the people who had these higher noble ideals in mind, that's the end of it,
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. Some people love to point to Pyrrhus, he's sort of the last one of those, but lots of other people would say no, it's more like Hannibal. Hannibal's one of the last one of those. And that this great rivalry between Scipio and Hannibal is sort of just a great story. The Romans loved that story about themselves, about their own history. As I say, Hannibal becomes kind of a beloved figure in a sense, in the way maybe Napoleon is or something. Not beloved might not be the right word, but
no. I think there is an affection there. Right?
Yeah, an affection.
Like there's something reassuring about having an enemy that powerful who is also not able to conquer you, because I mean, who else could you have put Hannibal against that could have withstood him?
No, I mean, I don't know.
Right. Exactly. You don't even you just think, okay, well, he would have just whipped everyone else. There's literally no one else in the entire world contemporaneously to Hannibal that would have been able to resist him, in my opinion. And so, and I think that this would have been a fairly well understood thing. And so it's just like it's just a shame that it was Rome that he had to go against, because if given a different foe, Hannibal would have ended up like Alexander. He would have ended up conquering the known world to the east, wouldn't he?
Quite
Well, I mean, had he wanted to go that way, but I mean, he would have easily, like, assuming the Romans didn't exist and Italy was just backwards, left alone in Spain, he would have just brought the entire peninsula to heel. It would have been no problem for him.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the things, one of the grander narratives to say about Hannibal and his career and his sort of impact on Rome is that I said right near the beginning, I think that there's sort of this window of 120 years, if you want to count it, or not, other people count it more like this period of 70 years, where again Rome goes from this sort of toddler to something formidable. It transformed from just one of the many powers in the Mediterranean to this, the all-powerful, all-dominating hyperpower. And it was Hannibal, their experience of Hannibal, that forged them in that way. And the irony that Hannibal and his father, or the Barca family, spent their whole life, all their energies, and sort of wasted an empire in the attempt to annihilate Rome, and all it did was galvanize them. All it did was make them into the powerhouse they became.
Yeah, that is totally true. But I think it's hard to imagine when you're standing over all the bodies at Cannae, you're probably thinking the Roman envoys are going to be here very soon to accept, to beg for our conditions, and so I don't think anyone would have expected the Romans to be quite as hard-headed as they were about these things. And I think it's probably because you don't know this until afterwards, and after the Punic Wars, like, everyone can see what the Romans are prepared to endure to rule, and that's the question: how far are you going to go to make sure that you rule? And the Romans are going to go further than absolutely everyone else. These are absolute mentals who are just not going to hold back. And I guess it's just easier to let these lunatics be in charge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about the Third Punic War at all, or touch on it, or do it another time, or I mean,
well, the Third Punic War isn't really anywhere nearly as exciting as the first two. The Carthaginians have been preparing, because this is long after Hannibal's death, like 50 years after his death or something. Yeah. In fact, how long is it between?
Well, so it's like 146.
Oh yeah.
BC that Carthage finally falls, but I think they go across there about 3 years before that. So yeah, it's a good sort of generation.
Two generations.
50 odd years later. Yeah, there's a whole other Scipio. There's a fifth Scipio to know, Scipio Aemilianus. So a whole generation later. And apparently Polybius was his friend. Was his friend in real life, and Polybius was actually there in the Third Punic War. If you want to talk about, we could do it for another day. It's up to you.
Well, no, we can cover it quickly if you want, because
well, it's all bound up with Cato the Elder, isn't it?
Yes. And furthermore, Carthage must be destroyed.
Delenda Carthago est.
Yeah.
This politician Cato was supposed to have at one point gone over to as an emissary or some sort of diplomatic party, went over to Carthage and was aghast to find them living in luxury with lots of money and all their sort of maritime empire stuff still going on, and he didn't like that. He was a bit terrified by it in a way.
Yeah,
and, seemed to have been paranoid. And one of the famous things was that he was supposed to have finished every time he spoke in the Senate or the Assembly, he would finish whatever he was saying by saying Delenda Carthago est, Carthage must be destroyed. And
like you say, he brings back like figs or something from Carthage, and he probably could have bought them in the market, for fuck's sake. But he brings back this fig and he lets it fall out of his toga, and it's this big ripe fig, it's juicy, it's like, okay. And he's like, see, this is what the Carthaginians are producing. They're rich, they're dangerous. Rome's in danger, and at this point, Carthage is absolutely no danger to Rome. There's no war spirit for war in Carthage at this point. They're just getting on with their lives, it seems, as far as they're concerned. Although they did build a fleet of 25,000 men. They kept hidden in their harbor, but even then, that's not a threat to Rome. There's no way that's going to do anything to the Romans.
Yeah, it just does seem like Cato's quite paranoid. I mean,
delusional.
To say that after everything you say in the Senate, it's just strange. It's like, I move that the Right Honourable Gentleman's legislation, second bill on the Agrarian Reform Bill, should indeed go ahead. Carthage must be destroyed.
Yep.
It's weird. Why would you? And people at the
is.
time also noted that. That's not just a modern thing. People at the time were like, this guy's a bit crackers. But
Yeah.
in the end, ultimately, the state went with him. They did play out his policy, didn't they? They ended up going over.
Well, yeah. Let me remind myself how it begins. So it begins in 149 BC.
They send over an army, a sort of double consular army, as Emilianus isn't actually the leader of it or anything yet.
Oh, that's right. So,
they just make crazy demands of Carthage, don't they? Crazy demands.
Yeah. The Carthaginians are accused of breaking the treaty by waging war in Africa, if I recall correctly. And I think it's to do with Massinissa trying to take their territory or something like that, or the descendants of Massinissa.
That's right. So the Carthaginians are having some sort of their long-time enemies are the Numidians, and so at this stage there's still this sort of antagonism with them, and the Romans. Well, they're just using any excuse, really. It's not. There's nothing legit about it. They're just using any reason to stomp on Carthage, and they start saying things like, "Well, you've got to." They start by saying things like, "You've got to give up all your navy again." And there's another.
Before we get to that, just quickly, So I'm just checking the wiki articles to remind myself. Massinissa's seizures of and raids into Carthaginian territory have become increasingly flagrant. So Carthage raised an army commanded by Hasdrubal. Not the same Hasdrubal, obviously. Hasdrubal the Botarch. Little is known about him apparently, but the treaty notwithstanding, counterattacked the Numidians. The campaign ended in disaster, and the army surrendered. A large number of Carthaginians were subsequently massacred by the Numidians. Hannibal escaped Carthage, and in an attempt to placate Rome, he was condemned to death. Carthage paid off its indemnity and was prospering, but was no military threat to Rome. Nonetheless, the Roman Senate were like, "Nope, fuck it. This was a pretext," and then they begin the expedition. And like you say, they send over 2 consular armies, so it's about 80,000 men they turn up with.
Yeah, like tons.
And then they start issuing these. And the thing is, right, this just what the Romans then do to Carthage feels disproportionately cruel. Because the Carthaginians for 50 years have lived in peace. They've been attacked by the Numidians. The Romans should have intervened. The Carthaginians should have been able to appeal to Rome and say, "Well, look, your allies are attacking us when you've said our possessions are guaranteed. Why are you letting this happen?" Right? But instead, the Romans come over and treat the Carthaginians like they were the ones who did something wrong, which they weren't. And then, like you say, they start making these fucking ridiculous demands. And these are so unreasonable. The Carthaginians must have laughed. Just, what? What are you asking for? So the first, obviously, dismantle their navy and all that, right? And then it was disarm the city. So then it's, give over any arms and armor that they've got in the city. And the Carthaginians just do it. So they give them all of their weapons, all of their stuff. So they're totally defenseless. And then the Romans are like, "Right, now you've got to move your city 10 miles away from the sea." They're like, what?
That is mad, isn't it? Completely unprecedented.
Because Carthage has got 700,000 people in it at this point. So this isn't going to happen. What do you mean move 10 miles from the sea? We need the sea to trade. And it's like, yeah, we know. That's the point. We know we are erasing you. You are going to learn to till the fields or something, because you're not going to be traders now. Carthage is over. This is the new Roman reality. And so the Carthaginians are like, "Well, get fucked." And then they go into war mode, and they just, all the factories they've got in Carthage, which is, massive prosperous city, they start churning out weapons and armor. And then it's, you can liken it to a Holocaust. It's really, really bad.
I was going to say that, actually, as loaded as that word is, I have heard more than one people say it's a Carthaginian Holocaust.
Well, it's a deliberate campaign of extermination.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, because they sorry.
Yeah, and there's nothing really that the Carthaginians can do to get out of it except be just destroyed again, like in every way.
Yeah, they know from the off that they're going to lose this if the Romans are intent So yeah, when the Romans start making all these crazy demands, like we want to take prisoners of all your leading men, all your great generals and things, and they say, yeah, sure, we've got no choice. Give us all your arms and armor. Yeah, okay, sure, and like do what you want. We're not in a position to do anything else. Then they're like, move your entire city brick by brick to 10 miles inland, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess. And then the Romans like, do you know what? Even that, no, do you know what? Fuck it, we'll just destroy you entirely right now. Forget about it.
It's so totally unreasonable, and the Carthaginians put up no resistance. Like again, I can't believe the Carthaginians are like, can we not just have a Roman governor?
Can we not? We'll do that. Yeah, they will. They seem like they'll agree to anything.
Right.
But then when it becomes clear the Romans are going to do a full-scale Thebes-style annihilation, they do sort of finally put up some sort of defense. But of course, it's
you say some sort of defense. I mean, how long was it that it took? It took ages. Yeah, so it begins in 149 BC, right? And the Roman army tries to attempts to scale the walls twice, but Carthage has got amazing walls. But then they settle down for a siege, and so they're sat outside for 4 years while the Carthaginians have controlled nothing. You know, they can't even get outside their city. They can't get on the ocean. They're completely screwed.
They've got their deep water harbour, haven't they?
They do, yeah.
That can hold lots of ships. And is there one point left the Romans blockade them in, so they break down a part of their own wall in order to get in and out of their harbour still?
Yes.
And I mean, it does feel and seem doomed, but yeah, it doesn't fall quickly, does it?
No. And it is grueling. And then when the Romans finally, after 4 years, break in, it's horrible. And the descriptions we have are really graphic, really vivid.
Yeah, I think Appian is one of the most graphic, and it's one of the most complete massacres or annihilations in the ancient world, or in all of history. It seems to have been the order to not leave one brick on top of another. It seems like they really sort of tried to do that. It took them a year, I think, to... Of course, they murdered everyone, and everyone that was left was sold into slavery. But then completely annihilated the city.
We know how many, because like the fighting was like it took 2 weeks for them to conquer the city after breaching the walls, right?
Yeah, it was room to room stuff, wasn't it?
House to house, block to block, and the houses were like, some of them were 6 stories tall. So sometimes they just set fire to the house, the block of houses, to kill whoever's in it, and to burn it down, just to save the time and save the manpower, because the Carthaginians are fighting their very lives. So the Romans are taking bad casualties, and it's like the thing that strikes you is the psychological horror of what's happening. It's bad for the Romans as well as for the Carthaginians. And then there's a story of like a mother who is on top of a burning building, and she yells down something at the Romans, a curse or something, grabs her children, and then leaps to her death with her children. And it's like, Jesus fucking Christ. And that's just one story out of the 700 or so thousand who are there. And then at the end of it, like only 50,000 people escape. Well, no, not escape, are captured and enslaved. So 650,000 people are murdered in a few square miles by the Romans. And the city, like you say, is burned down, torn down brick by brick. They don't salt the earth. That's metaphorical. There's no way they salted the earth.
Yeah, I think the archaeology shows there was no salting of earth going on.
I mean,
but still.
The Romans end up recolonizing Carthage with, making it rebuilding it as a Roman city, because it's in such a fertile area. You're not going to waste that. But yeah, it's the extinction of the Carthaginian people.
Yeah, Appian describes it as a scene of just terrible, terrible horror, like a bit stomach churning to read. It's like, I get it. There's loads of women and babies being butchered in the streets. I get it. It's horrible. But it sort of goes on and on. It's like,
and the Carthaginians didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve any of this. This was...
Well, the CO on the ground by that point in the final taking of it in 146 was Scipio Aemilianus, who's sort of the grandson of the main Scipio. And apparently Polybius says that he was a bit horrified by it. He himself, I can't remember the exact wording, but he was like, this is a bit much, isn't it? Like, this is a bit disgusting, isn't it?
Like, do you think?
Yeah, just a bit. Well, they were so... sorry, go on.
Well, yeah, but this is one of the most prestigious cities in the world that you've beaten into total subjection and humiliation, and now you've taken everything from them, and now you're just killing them in their streets. They're totally not a threat to you, you fucking lunatics. but still, I mean, God knows what the PTSD in the soldiers must have been like after it.
God, yeah.
Must
Yeah,
have been
we mentioned the salting of the earth thing, so nothing could grow, and that well, that
Mm.
didn't happen. But what does seem to have happened, the archaeology does show, was that the main bit, the main central portion of Carthage, like most cities, was on a small hill or a rise of land, and they destroyed every single building, brick to the lowest brick, and they leveled that hill. They leveled the hill, and then they put a giant slab of concrete that's many city blocks big, just big, where the Romans had this special sort of concrete, didn't they? And famously, and they just covered the area, like downtown Carthage, with this giant slab of concrete, like an apron at an airfield. It's just like you sort of couldn't annihilate it more. And Carthage had its own library. That was one of the real tearjerkers, if you like. That their entire literary tradition, all their own history is gone. So we haven't got any. There's no Carthaginian equivalent of Polybius or Livy or Plutarch. And that's obviously deliberate. And they really did a number on them in the end. The Romans
we know so little about Carthage because of the complete and thorough destruction of the city, and it's sad. It's really sad.
And it seems pathological on the Romans' part that this is sort of the exercising of some sort of demon or something. Like overkill. When someone stabs somebody else 120 times, it's like, oh, okay, there's something. There's something else going on there. You didn't just want to kill them, did you? There's something much more wrong going on in your mind.
Totally. It's something wrong with the Romans because of what Hannibal did to them, I guess. But yeah, so that's the tragic end of Carthage.
Yeah, the story of Hannibal and Carthage. Yeah, well, thanks as always, Carl, for your time. It's really, really enjoyable. I shall be making videos out of this, probably a two-parter if that's all right with you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, do you think we did it justice? Have you got anything else a particular bit you want to say? I can edit it in at the right point.
Yeah, no, just I think we've done it justice.
It's a fair few hours worth again, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot. For anyone who's interested in going into any more depth, there are loads of books you can get. I mean, there are untold numbers of books that have been written about Hannibal because of what a fascinating character he was and the things he accomplished. And it is definitely worth going through more about when he's in Antiochus's court, because you don't get to see that much of his character through the eyes of other people and the words he speaks during his Italian campaign. But you do when he's with Antiochus and encountering Scipio and things like this. And that's where you get really interesting. Like, he's very Spartan. He's very laconic. He's terse. He doesn't waste his words. He says exactly what he means. And he says it very efficiently. But he's always seems to act in a noble way. And I find myself really admiring the guy that he was. I mean, like, he didn't raise any cities. He ravaged the countryside, sure. But, he didn't raise any cities. He didn't commit any, genocides or anything like that. He didn't wipe out tribes, and he genuinely seemed to have an ideal in his head. The ideal of warfare as the Greeks had established it. And that era he was the closing of that era, really. And
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely right. I think when we just talked about any further reading, I think there's Adrian Goldsworthy is one of the sort of his work on the Punic Wars, sort of one of the gold standards. But I advise anyone to pick up Plutarch and maybe read The Life of Fabius, because it's fairly short. Again, you're only looking at, 30 or 40 sides. It's not that long. You can read it on one long train journey, and beyond that, I think Livy, I like Livy. Polybius is a bit broken up, but Livy's got a full account, but that is a whole, 300-400 page book. But it's a great yarn, a ripping yarn.
But there's lots of good modern scholarship on it. And practically any book you get will be good, because the sources for Hannibal's life and activities are quite canonical at this point. Like, the main points are very, very well known, and it's easy to access them because he's such a mythological figure at this point.
We could check out Lindy Bage, perhaps, or
maybe
the Britisher has got something on it. I would have thought. Probably. I don't know for sure, but
I would be surprised if they don't. But I mean, if you just search Hannibal on YouTube, you will find many, many, many excellent documentaries, things like that. and they're totally worth your time.
Cool.
What should we do next?
Oh, well, I was actually thinking about this. I thought possibly we could do the Gracchi brothers or Marius and Sulla or sort of both, that whole sort of 50, 60, 70-year period. Or if you've got something else in mind.
Well, have we done the Peloponnesian War?
Yeah, we
did do the Peloponnesian.
Yeah. I think that was,
remember whether we did.
That was the first one we did. Yeah,
that was the first one.
Yeah,
right,
Thucydides.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. As long as we haven't skipped over any momentous events leading up to this. I mean, so
well, one of the main ones we haven't done, if you wanted to go back, is Herodotus, because we did Thucydides and then Xenophon.
Oh god, then I'd have to reread Herodotus. It's been like 20 years since I've read him.
Bit of an ask. It is a bit of a it's a bit of a ball ache, isn't it, Herodotus? If you're honest,
yeah,
it's both great and a ball ache, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel bad for Herodotus that he's called the father of lies. It's come on. He literally says, well, this is what I've been told, but I'm not in every instance bound to believe it. He's just a journalist, basically. Well, this is reporting on what's been said.
Yeah, I mean, so too, we could do that, or I thought maybe we could talk about the Iliad one day. But if you wanted to just keep going forward,
let's keep going forward.
We could, I suppose, one of the next big things is sort of the Gracchi brothers or Marius and Sulla, that sort of
the social war and all that.
Yeah, that period where Rome goes from a republic to an empire.
This is how Rome copes with being the big dog. Because it's all the thing as well is with the Romans, they've always had the attitude that they are the underdogs, right? And so because ever since the sack of Brennus, the Roman attitude is that we are superior in will, but I don't know, inferior in other ways like prestige and like reach, because there were much bigger empires and stuff like this. But the Romans clearly were onto a winning formula, and they knew it. But then it was like the Italian allies saying, well, look, we stuck with you through all of this. We demand incorporation. We demand, that you accept us as equals and partners rather than subjects and things like this. And it's very interesting. I mean, and the Gracchi as well, like going into the class politics of Rome, very interesting stuff. I'd definitely be up for doing one of those.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's sort of some good parallels, some maybe obvious parallels between the Kennedy brothers and the Gracchi brothers, and perhaps many other parallels with the first cracks in a republic, obviously referencing America, the first cracks in the republic when certain magistrates can take the piss, basically.
They're totally corrupt. I mean, look, these magistrates find themselves with foreign commands where they are beholden to no one, and they become totally corrupt in some instances. So yeah, we'll talk about that. So what I'll do is I'll say we'll do this when we've got the new podcast set up ready.
Cool.
So we can do it in the flesh and do it properly.
Cool. So should we pencil in sort of the Gracchi?
Yeah.
That sort of 20-year window there. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, because that was one of the things I did at uni in a fair amount of detail. So
did you?
Yeah. So
that's cool, because the thing is, it's important stuff now, because I think the same sort of social forces that were present under the Gracchi, I think, are present in America now. And I honestly, I think that Trump is a kind of Gracchi figure. I think these sort of populist reformers.
I was going to say populist. Yeah, right.
Yeah, the Trump is basically asking for a lot of things the Gracchi were asking for as well, which is really interesting. But we'll go through it.
Like the people love it and the swamp want him dead.
Obviously. Yeah. But yeah, we'll do that properly, because I think it's got real political relevance. It'll be good content.
Cool.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for doing this, man. I really enjoy doing these.
Oh no, well, that's music to my ears. Thank you.
No problem at all, man. Right, I'll let you go, and I'll speak to you soon.
You have a nice evening.
Bye.
Take care.